Hello my lovelies, I'm looking at a piece of writing from Lee Child, who writes a series of books with a character called Jack Reacher, and I'm looking at how he's using sentence forms for specific effects in narrative writing. Hopefully there are things in here that you might be able to pick up on as well, and some probably that you won't want to touch with Bargepole. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to just go through and look at how he's using sentences. I'm not going to talk very much about what the effect of that is or why he might have done it. I'm just looking to identify, and maybe we'll have some discussion about effect afterwards. Okay, so we start with Reacher. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Reacher because I think you need to understand the character to understand why Lee Child is writing in this way. Firstly, Jack Reacher is like an American Marine, and he just goes around. Essentially, I think all his books just involve beating up people and rescuing damsels in distress and saving America from certain destruction. And Reacher is this kind of man of few words. So you have got this kind of very terse writing style where you don't, you get that effect of being a man of very few words, that he doesn't have, unlike me, lots of redundancies and tautologies and surplus words. So you get no flowery purple language, and we'll look at flowery and purple in other videos. But that's going to very much influence how Lee Child is writing. And even though he's writing in the third person, we see Reacher's thoughts sometimes, not very often. Maybe he doesn't have any. He's a man of action, not of words. Excuse my silly voice. I can't read Reacher without having a silly voice in my head. And what you get there is this kind of almost omniscient narrator, but you get the way almost that Reacher thinks in the way that Lee Child writes. So we're going to see that, and I think that will affect some of the things that you'll see. So we start with the easy stuff. I'm just going to be like identifying verbs. All I'm doing is counting verbs. Reacher moved. So in that sentence, Reacher moved fast and quiet to the back door of the house. We've got one verb. And we have got a subject. So to start with, we have got a simple sentence. Then the next sentence is pressed himself tight against the wall on the far side. Okay, we have a verb and we have no subject. The subject is Reacher, which is back here and it's separated by a full stop. So technically speaking, that because it's not got a subject and a verb, that is a fragment. We get the same again. Another fragment. And then I have to think to myself, okay, can Lee Child not write? Does he not realise that sentences need subjects as well? Does he need to use all these sentence fragments? Now, even if Lee Child couldn't write, which I suspect he can, he also has an editor, and usually editors can write. So I think, were the editor in any doubt, they'd have sent this back and gone, Lee, you need some subject with your sentences, please. So then I have to think, well, okay, well, this is deliberate then. This is a conscious choice. And I need to think about what that is. So, firstly, number one is it's clear that this is Reacher, but then lots of writing has only got one main subject, per paragraph. So that's not a reason, that's not a good reason not to put a subject in and to depend on fragments. And I think it just comes down to, we take out those two tiny words, and they are tiny, he and he, it makes the writing a little bit more speedy, just a tiny bit, and it also makes it a little bit more fragmented, almost like it's at its most basic. It doesn't need these extra words. It's almost like Reacher, he's so kind of like basic actions that it doesn't even need the word he. We get another he here, which is helpful. Then we have he could feel, and we have a subject. So we've gone back to one verb, one subject. I don't have another verb in that sentence, so it's a simple sentence. I've got the exact same construction here, verb subject, and you can see there's a parallel. He could feel, he could hear. So again, there's something about that simple pair that is also, I think, very deliberate. I'm not going to talk about the effect, so there. Then we move on, very faintly, one side of a two-way conversation. No verb, that's a fragment. A slight Hispanic accent, another verbless fragment. Perez on the phone, and another verbless fragment. 3 in a row. You know we writers love threes. Reacher reversed his rifle in his hand. So we have a verb here, and we have a subject, Reacher. Also, by the way, by missing out those pronouns in some of those sentences, it avoids a horrible repetition of he, or Reacher, Reacher, Reacher. And repetition at the beginning of sentences is very ugly. Gripped. So we've gone back to the structure we were seeing before, where we actually don't have a subject. This is interesting though, because what we've got here, you may not think it's interesting, I think it's interesting. What we've got here is our first coordinating conjunction, one of our fanboys. And, so were this to be, and it's followed by a verb as well, were this to be a sentence that did have subjects, it would be a compound sentence. He gripped the forestock in front of the carrying handle, and he took a practice swing. Because it's sequential, it's not, the took a practice swing is not dependent on the bit that came before. Then this very lovely little 2-sentence paragraph that stands out. Then he waited, alone in the dark. Very dramatic. These little paragraphs, by the way, are beautiful for like adding a bit of tension and a bit of drama and a bit of the waiting. So we've got a simple sentence there. We've got a verb and we've got a subject. And then we've got another fragment. Can you see how many fragments you've got here? I mean, there's really something very deliberate going on here. We've had nothing but fragments and simple sentences. And you have to think that's got to be, there's some kind of deliberate action going on there. Okay, one of my favourites. Perez stepped out into the night, turned to close the door behind him, and Reacher swung, arms extended, hips twisting, driving forward off the back foot, wrists snapping. Okay, so verb and a subject. That makes it a little bit easier. At least I know it's going to be at least simple. Then we have another verb. And there's another verb here. And we've got an and before it. So we've got some kind of compound, because we've got another subject there. Okay, but when you look at it, we've also got other verbs. Now these are participles, so they're functioning to describe. They're not, but they are actions. And what you get are 7 actions in one sentence. Okay, you've got step, turn, swung, extended, twisting, driving, and snapping. And especially with those present participles towards the end, what you get is a sense of movement. Why would you want to put that all into one sentence? Well, firstly, what Lee Child is saying is, I want you to consider all of these ideas happened in the same thing. There's no break. There's no gap between them. They didn't stop. There's not a full stop separation. These things were continuous. So that's one reason I might use a compound sentence. But also it has another effect. This sentence is really long and lots of detail. So I have to think to myself, so why would he do that? And I think it's kind of like a sentence version of slow motion, because you've got 7 actions that happen in one moment, and it kind of slows everything down again. So we don't actually know whether we were successful or not. But he answers us in a very straightforward manner with our fragments here. No good, late. No verbs. A foul ball for sure, left field, upper deck, off the facade, maybe out into the street. And again, no verb. So we've got 3 fragments in a row. But Perez's head was not a baseball, and the G36 was not a bat. It was an 8-pound yard of steel. Oh, he loves his 3 patterns, 2s and 3s. But Perez's head was not a baseball. So we've got a verb and we've got a subject. And the G36, so we've got another verb and a subject. And then we've got a pronoun replacing the G36. So we've got 3 simple sentences there in a row. Can you notice these like coordinating connectives at the beginning? What he's doing is he's giving almost a sense of continuation, but you've got a pattern there, but, and, which is interesting. The sight block caught Perez in the temple and punched a shard of bone sideways through his left eye socket and on through the bridge of his nose and halfway through his right eye socket. Okay, deliciously brutal. So what have we got here? We've got a verb, and what caught? The sight block caught. Then we've got an object, Perez, in the temple and punched. Oh, and we've got a fanboys. Punched. There's another verb. A shard of bone. So that's a sight block. What punched? A sight block punched. A shard of bone sideways through his left eye socket and on through the bridge of his nose and halfway through his right eye socket. Okay, the grammar of this sentence is far too complicated for me to discuss in the remaining 4 minutes of this video. But what you've got here, you've got two verbs. Arguably, they've got the same subject, but the fact that there are two verbs makes that a compound sentence of sorts. And then you've got all of these ands. Now, were I a primary school teacher and lead child in my primary school class, I would have sent this back and said, now, dearly, can you please go and put me some more full stops in, because we can't use 3 coordinating connectives or 3 ands in one sentence. So I have to think, so why has he done this and risked the wrath of grammarians? I think it's because he's, again, like this sentence up here, saying these things happen in the same moment. There's no interruption, there's no break. That shard of bone, it doesn't stop once it's left his eye socket, and it doesn't stop when it gets to the bridge of his nose, and it doesn't stop when it gets, well, it stops after it reaches halfway through his right eye socket. It's continuous. And the compound sentence, for me, very much reinforces that continuity. Then it stopped. So the full stop emphasises that then. Verb. And we have a subject that goes with it as well. It. When the top edge of the stock crushed his ear flat against the side of the skull. So we've got a change of pace here. Again, the grammar I'm not going to get into, but what we don't have is a fragment. And we don't have one of these enormously beautiful long sentences like we've had 2 of so far. Okay, so another fanboy at the beginning of a sentence. Oh, Lee, you're such a rule breaker. So, not a perfect swing, and another fragment. No verb. A millisecond earlier and 2 inches further back, a blow like that would have taken the top of the guy's head off like opening a soft-boiled egg. What a lovely simile. So there's our verb. What would have taken the top of the guy's head off? A blow like that. Okay, so there's my subject. A millisecond earlier and 2 inches further back. Right, this is description, but there's no verb in it. And there's this verb here, but it's not completed, and it's part of that simile. This is very complex, but I think because we've only got one verb in there and we've only got one subject and everything else is descriptive, I think there's some argument that this is completely simple. I don't want to spend too long on the grammar of it, but I don't think it's as complex as you might think it is, even though there's lots of words in it. This is different. Late as it was, we've got another verb here, so we've got a dependent clause. So this is a little bit easier to say this is a complex sentence. So this is our first, I think, arguably, complex sentence. So it is my subject there. So that's the first bit where we're arguably into a completely different type of sentence there. Messy but effective. Back to the fragments.